March 22nd, 12:15 a.m. The helicopter banked sharply to the left, its rotors slicing through the air with a deafening roar. Below, the pack of hybrids spread out like a deadly tide, their glowing eyes reflecting the dim moonlight as they sprinted across the open fields. Their snarls carried over the howl of the wind, a guttural symphony of rage that made my blood run cold. The air inside the cabin was suffocating, thick with the metallic tang of sweat and fear. "Hold on," the pilot shouted, his voice strained over the comms. "We've got trouble." I gripped the safety harness as the chopper lurched again, my stomach flipping with the sudden motion. Through the open side door, I caught a glimpse of the Alpha below, its massive frame illuminated by the searchlight. It wasn't just chasing us, it was orchestrating. The pack's movements were calculated, herding us into a trap we couldn't yet see. "They're too fast," Maria said, her voice tight with fear as she leaned out of the open door, her rifle trained on the pack. "Even if we're airborne, they'll find a way to reach us." "They don't need to," Calloway muttered, his face pale. "Look at their formation. They're guiding us somewhere." Price leaned forward, gripping the edge of the doorway. "Pilot, what's our heading?" "Straight toward the safe zone," the pilot replied. "But it's a long shot if they keep this up." "They're faster than we thought." "Then we slow them down," Price said, her tone resolute. "Tucker, Maria, light them up." 12:20 a.m. Tucker and Maria opened fire, their bullets raining down on the hybrids below. The sharp cracks of their weapons echoed in the night, and several of the creatures fell, their twisted forms tumbling into the dirt. But the Alpha's roar cut through the chaos, galvanizing the pack. They surged forward with renewed fury, their glowing scars pulsing like fiery veins. "We're not making a dent," Tucker yelled, slamming another shell into his shotgun. "There's too many of them." The helicopter shuddered as something slammed into its underside. Green screamed, clutching the portable drive to her chest as the entire cabin rattled. "What was that?" she cried. "They're jumping," Calloway shouted, pointing to one of the hybrids as it leaped from the ground, its claws swiping at the skids. Another hybrid followed, its powerful legs propelling it high enough to latch onto the landing gear. "Get it off," Price barked. Maria aimed her rifle and fired, the shot hitting the hybrid square in the chest. It screeched and fell away, but more were already gathering for another attempt. Their ferocity was unlike anything we'd encountered, and their glowing scars pulsated in unison, a harrowing display of their connection to the Alpha. Each leap seemed to be a coordinated effort, their movements eerily synchronized. 12:25 a.m. "We're losing altitude," the pilot called out, his voice taut with panic. "If this keeps up, we're going down." Price turned to Calloway. "You said you had a plan. Now would be a good time to share it." Calloway's jaw tightened as he reached into his pack and pulled out a small device with blinking lights. "EMP drone," he said. "Short range, but it should disrupt their coordination long enough for us to break free." "Deploy it," Price ordered. Calloway activated the drone and tossed it out of the helicopter. It spiraled downward, its lights flashing as it emitted a high-pitched whine. The effect was immediate. The hybrids stumbled, their movements jerky and disoriented. Even the Alpha paused, shaking its massive head as though trying to clear it. "It's working," Green exclaimed, her voice trembling with hope. "Pilot, gain altitude now," Price commanded. The helicopter surged upward, its rotors straining as it climbed higher into the night sky. Below, the pack's cohesion dissolved, and the Alpha's frustrated roar echoed in the distance. But even as we ascended, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was temporary. The sight of the Alpha, its glowing scars flickering like dying embers, was burned into my memory. 12:30 a.m. The cabin was silent except for the hum of the rotors. Everyone sat in stunned exhaustion, their faces pale and drawn. Tucker leaned his head back against the wall, his shotgun resting across his lap. Maria stared out the open door, her rifle still in hand, her expression unreadable. The fading adrenaline left a hollow ache in my chest, a reminder of how close we had come to falling. "We're clear for now," Price said, breaking the silence. "But this isn't over. The Alpha knows where we're headed." It'll regroup and come for us again. Then we need to be ready, I said, gripping my Halligan tool tightly. No more running. If it comes for us, we make our stand. Easier said than done, Maria muttered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. That thing's not just strong. It's smart. Smarter than anything we've seen before. Which is why we need intel, Calloway added. He opened his pack and began pulling out schematics and data pads. If we can figure out its command structure, we might have a chance. The Alpha doesn't act alone. It's connected to something, or someone. Green glanced at the portable drive in her lap, her hands still trembling. The data we extracted from Orpheus, it's got to have answers. It has to. Then we'll find them, Price said. Her voice was steady, but her gaze was distant, as though already calculating the battles to come. We'll figure out how to stop it, and we'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again. The helicopter continued its journey, the horizon tinged with the faint glow of dawn. But even as the first light of day began to break, the shadows of the night clung to us, a haunting reminder of the relentless predator still out there, waiting for its next move. Each of us knew, whether we admitted it or not, that the Alpha would not stop until it found us again. And when it did, the true fight would begin. 6 a.m. The helicopter hit the ground with a bone-rattling impact, the rotors thrashing the air above us as though fighting to stay aloft. Dust erupted around the landing site, swallowing the compound's floodlights in a blinding haze. For a brief, harrowing moment, the world was chaos. The whine of the engine, the thudding of boots against steel, and the relentless roar of the helicopter all merging into one deafening cacophony. The safe zone stood as a monolith in the distance, its steel gates shimmering like a mirage against the dawn light. Out! Out! Move! Price barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a whip crack. Green, get the drive inside. Maria and I flanked Green as she stumbled down the ramp, clutching the portable drive like a lifeline. Her knuckles were white against the casing, her breath shallow and rapid. Tucker followed close behind, his shotgun swaying precariously on his shoulder. Blood seeped through the bandage around his torso, staining his shirt in dark patches. Calloway brought up the rear, his eyes darting over the horizon with sharp, practiced paranoia. Are we clear? I shouted over the fading roar of the rotors, my own voice feeling small and fragile against the enormity of the moment. Price spared a fleeting glance over her shoulder as she ushered us forward. Clear as a myth, she muttered. Let's go. The gates groaned open, revealing a bustling compound fortified by steel and desperation. Soldiers in mismatched fatigues patrolled the perimeter, their weapons raised and their eyes scanning the horizon. Survivors clustered in small groups, their hollow eyes and weathered faces telling stories of battles lost and homes abandoned. Floodlights swept across the compound in rhythmic arcs, their harsh beams slicing through the lingering dust as if daring the darkness to encroach. The smell of diesel fuel, gunpowder, and sweat was overwhelming. It clung to everything, an unshakable reminder of the world outside these fragile walls. 6:15 a.m. Inside, we were hustled into a debriefing room that smelled of coffee and damp concrete. Maps and monitors lined the walls, their surfaces crowded with pins and shifting lines of data. A man in a crisp uniform stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid and his expression unreadable. Colonel Hayes didn't look like someone who had slept in days. His eyes were sharp and calculating, flicking between us like he was appraising tools for a dangerous job. You've done well to make it this far, Hayes began, his voice cool and steady. The data you recovered is vital, but it's only part of the picture. Part of the picture? Maria snapped, her hands still resting on her rifle. Her tone was sharp, her movements tense. We nearly died getting that drive. What more do you need? Hayes's gaze shifted to the portable drive resting on the table. This confirms what we've suspected for months, he said, tapping a button on the console beside him. The monitors flickered to life, showing images of hybrids and alphas. Their grotesque forms loomed large on the screen, accompanied by dense lines of schematics and data. Orpheus isn't just experimenting. They're deploying. A low murmur rippled through the room. Price's jaw tightened. Deploying what? Hayes's voice dropped, laden with a weight that made my stomach knot. Weapons. Biological, tactical, psychological. The Alphas aren't just predators. They're commanders. They're designed to organize the infected, turning chaos into strategy. This isn't just survival anymore. This is war. Green sank into a chair, her face ashen. How do we stop them? She whispered. We find their command center, Hayes said. And we destroy it. 7 a.m. The debriefing ended in a heavy silence, and we were escorted to a makeshift barracks at the edge of the compound. The tension was palpable, an invisible force that hung over us as we settled into the cramped space. Maria sat on the edge of her cot, her hands working methodically as she cleaned her rifle. Each motion was precise, almost mechanical, her focus unyielding. Tucker leaned back against the wall, his head resting on his hands as he stared at the ceiling. His normally sharp demeanor was dulled, his exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Green sat cross-legged on her cot, the portable drive balanced on her lap. Her fingers traced its edges absently, as though it held all the answers we needed. This is bigger than any of us, Calloway said, breaking the silence. He was seated on the floor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of his thoughts. If Orpheus has more Alphas out there, this isn't a fight we can win with just bullets. We need to cut the head off the snake? You mean the command center, I said, my grip tightening on the Halligan tool resting by my side. Calloway nodded. And whoever's giving the orders. Price stood near the door, her arms crossed. Her gaze swept over each of us, her expression unreadable. This compound is the first step, she said. We regroup, rearm, and figure out our next move. But make no mistake, if we're going to stop this, we need to hit them where it hurts. 9 a.m. The sun was high now, casting long shadows across the compound. Outside, the hum of activity filled the air as soldiers and survivors worked side by side to reinforce the perimeter. Supplies were stacked high against the walls, weapons distributed with an almost mechanical efficiency. I found Green sitting by a fire pit, the portable drive still clutched in her hands. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. Do you think we can win? She asked softly. I hesitated, the enormity of the question pressing down on me. I think we have to try, I said finally. For all the people who didn't make it this far. For everyone still out there. Green nodded, a flicker of determination breaking through her exhaustion. Then we'd better make it count. The morning wore on, but the air was thick with unspoken fear. As plans were laid and supplies organized, the shadows of the night seemed to linger, a stark reminder that the fight was far from over. We weren't just running anymore. We were preparing for war. March 22nd, 10 a.m. The compound buzzed with a grim sense of urgency. Soldiers moved like clockwork, hauling crates of ammunition and barricading weak points along the perimeter. The air was electric, charged with the knowledge that an attack could come at any moment. Shadows of doubt and determination played across every face, and no one, not even the most seasoned among us, looked entirely sure that we'd survive the day. Price stood near the command tent, her expression as sharp and unyielding as the edge of a blade. Her eyes tracked every movement, her mind clearly working through 1,000 contingencies. Maria was by her side, flipping through a clipboard of supply lists, her brow furrowed in concentration. The faint lines of fatigue under her eyes spoke volumes about the pressure weighing on her. I leaned against a stack of sandbags, my Halligan tool resting by my side. The weapon had become more than a tool. It was a lifeline, an extension of my will to keep fighting. Across the yard, Green sat with Calloway near a table littered with maps and blueprints. The portable drive was plugged into a laptop, its screen flickering with streams of data as they sifted through the information we'd nearly died to recover. The faint hum of generators in the distance underscored the fragile sense of security within the compound's walls. Anything useful? I asked, walking over to them. My voice was low, my footsteps muffled by the dirt beneath my boots. Green glanced up, her face pale but focused. Plenty, she said. Too much, honestly. This data confirms everything Hayes told us. Orpheus isn't just experimenting. They're building infrastructure. labs, production facilities, staging grounds for their hybrids and alphas. Her voice wavered, betraying the growing fear she struggled to suppress. Calloway pointed to a section of the map highlighted in red. This is their main command hub. If we hit it, we cut off their ability to coordinate the infected. It won't stop the alphas entirely, but it'll slow them down. How heavily guarded is it? I asked, leaning in to study the map. Calloway's expression darkened. Enough to make this a suicide mission unless we plan it perfectly. We're not walking into a hornet's nest. We're diving headfirst. 10:30 a.m. The sound of an alarm shattered the morning's tense quiet. A high-pitched wail rose over the compound, freezing everyone in place for half a heartbeat before chaos erupted. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, weapons drawn, as shouts rang out across the yard. The ground trembled beneath my boots as I grabbed my Halligan tool, my heart pounding against my ribs. Contact! South perimeter! A voice shouted over the comms. Price was already moving, her rifle slung over her shoulder as she sprinted toward the action. "Let's go!" she barked, her voice cutting through the din like a whip crack. I followed, every sense on high alert. The south wall loomed ahead, its steel surface trembling under the weight of something massive. The infected swarmed like a living tide, their snarls and growls forming a terrible symphony of violence. Among them, a hulking figure emerged, an alpha, its glowing scars pulsating like molten veins, casting an ominous light on the battlefield. "Get those turrets online," Price shouted, firing into the horde. Her bullets hit true, dropping several infected in quick succession, but it barely made a dent in the overwhelming numbers. The Alpha's presence seemed to embolden the swarm, their movements more coordinated, more precise. "They're testing the walls," Maria said, her voice tight as she reloaded. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but the tension in her jaw revealed her unease. "This isn't the full assault." "Then we'd better pass the test," I muttered, gripping my tool as I moved to reinforce a group of soldiers struggling to hold the line. The air was thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood, the cries of the wounded mingling with the roars of the infected. 10:45 a.m. The battle raged on, the infected throwing themselves at the wall with relentless fury. Their bodies piled up in grotesque mounds, forming makeshift ramps that the others climbed with horrifying speed. The Alpha stood back, its glowing eyes fixed on the compound as if calculating its next move. Each step it took sent vibrations through the ground, a chilling reminder of its immense power. "It's coordinating them," Calloway said, his voice crackling over the comms. "We've got to take it out before it breaches the perimeter." Price nodded, her jaw set. "Tucker, Maria, on me. We're taking the fight to it." "You're insane," Maria said, even as she loaded another magazine into her rifle. "But I'm in." "Stay alive," I said, meeting Price's eyes briefly before she and her team disappeared into the fray. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on me, but there was no time to dwell on it. The breach was widening, and the infected were pouring through like water through a broken dam. 11 a.m. Explosions rocked the battlefield as Price and her team engaged the Alpha, their gunfire blending with the creature's guttural roars. From my position on the wall, I could see the chaos unfolding. The Alpha moved with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through soldiers and barriers alike. Price's movements were a blur of precision and resolve, every shot finding its mark despite the overwhelming odds. "We've got a breach," a soldier shouted, pointing to a section of the wall where the infected had begun to spill through. Their snarls were deafening, their glowing scars casting a sickly light on the carnage. I sprinted toward the breach, my Halligan tool raised. The first infected lunged at me, its clawed hands swiping for my throat. I swung hard, the tool connecting with a sickening crunch that sent it sprawling. Another followed, and another. Each one fell under the weight of my strikes, but the strain in my arms and the burning in my chest told me I couldn't hold them off forever. "Fall back," a voice called, and I turned to see green waving frantically from the barricades. "We've got to regroup." I nodded, retreating step by step as the infected surged forward. My legs burned, my breaths coming in ragged gasps as I fought to keep pace with the retreating line. The sight of Price's team battling the Alpha in the distance spurred me onward, a stark reminder of the stakes. 11:15 a.m. By the time we reached the inner defenses, the south wall was lost. Soldiers scrambled to reinforce the next line of barricades, their faces grim and pale. Price and her team emerged moments later, bloodied but alive. The Alpha's guttural roar had been silenced, but its absence was far from comforting. "The Alpha's down," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "But they'll be back, stronger." I looked around at the faces of my companions, the weight of our situation pressing down on me like a crushing tide. We had survived, but barely. The infected weren't just monsters, they were an army, and this was only the beginning of their siege. "What now?" Maria asked, her voice quiet but resolute. Price glanced toward the command tent, where Hayes stood watching the battlefield with an unreadable expression. "Now we prepare for the next wave," she said, "and we find a way to end this. Permanently,